Hey you guys, so today I want to talk about preparing vocals to be sent to another producer. So a lot of the vocals that I work with these days are tracked by clients in other locations. I'll build out a track, I'll send it to the client, they'll track their vocals, send them back to me, and the quality of those vocals that I get back vary. Sometimes I get something really great, but quite often I see some basic problems that I want to address today that if people understood what a producer would like to receive from them, I believe they could make those fixes pretty easily. So here we go. And a side note to all you producers that are watching this video right now and may be thinking, well, I know how to bounce vocals. I don't need you to show me how to do that. Keep in mind that if you, like me, are receiving files at times that just aren't properly prepared, they're not exported correctly, you could use this video to send out to a client and say, this is how you want it done. So when I send out a track to a client for them to track vocals to, I send out some basic instructions. One of the things I tell people is you need to start by tracking your vocals with a solid mic chain. You need to have a good microphone, you need to have a good preamp. Doesn't matter whether the preamp is hardware or software, as long as it's quality. You also will probably want to run a compressor after the preamp. Again, doesn't matter if it's hardware or software, as long as it's quality. And when recording the vocals, I ask people to give me either 24-bit quality or above. After the tracking, I want the vocals that are sent to me to be completely dry. I don't want them to be run through any kind of effects, any EQs, compressors. I prefer to do the tuning on my own, so I don't want any tuning put on there for sure. Don't leave an auto-tune plug-in on your track when you're bouncing it down. I don't want any reverbs or delays on there. Completely dry, completely raw. Again, I want them in mono. And then I also get some instructions on what parts I would like to receive. So obviously, you want to give me some leads. I ask for doubles in certain parts of the songs. Usually I prefer to get doubles on pre-choruses and choruses, bridges. Everything I ask for, it may not be the case that I end up using it in the end, but if they're tracking vocals somewhere else, I want to make sure I get as much that I can work with as possible. I usually ask for a couple of stacks of harmonies, especially on the chorus, maybe one or two harmonies. If they have a third or fourth harmony, fine, throw it in there. But for sure, at least 2 stacks of harmonies. And by stacks, I mean that everything that I'm talking about with doubles, harmonies, I want them all recorded left and right. And if any part of the lead vocal is sung in a high register, I will ask for low octaves to also be sent for those sections. And again, stacked, so they're left and right on the octaves. And the last thing I'll ask for is some ad-libs. At least one pass, maybe through the whole song, sometimes maybe 2 passes. And if a client is a little less experienced at the whole recording process, I may suggest some ideas on how to think about their ad-libs, how to get creative with that. All right, so what we're looking at on the screen are the vocal takes from a session that I did here. Lead vocals here, I split them up between verse, pre, and chorus. I've got stacks of doubles left and right, 3 sets of harmonies here, and I did go ahead and have octaves because this vocal was pretty high on the chorus. Little short piece of ad-libs here on the first chorus, which I probably ended up moving around. So one of the things you might notice here is that my vocals, they're not recorded very loud. The peak amplitude is about minus 6.81 dB. So I'm definitely not pushing the volume very hard coming into my session. So let me show you a basic setup for me. All right, so when I track vocals, I track through a UAD Apollo interface. And I used to just use the preamps off the Apollo. They actually were really great. But when they came up with the unison technology where you can basically turn the Apollo into different types of preamps, I really fell in love with that. And a lot of times I use this Neve 1073 plugin. Now when I'm tracking vocals, I don't run the EQ. And I don't fault anybody for doing that. If you're a producer and you're tracking vocals and you're going to be doing the mixing, then do whatever you feel there. But if somebody's doing vocals that they're going to be sent to me, I would prefer them to not apply EQ in the mic chain. So on your preamp, get yourself a basic level that's not too hot, gives it a little tone, a little attitude. But remember, when you hit those hot spots in your vocal, you don't want that preamp to be crushing it, especially if you're using something like a 1073, because it can really tend to start feeling crunchy, even in the yellow. When I use a 1073, I usually follow it with an 1176 compressor. Great combination. Don't get extreme with your compression. keep it pretty minimal, keeps the dynamics just a little bit controlled. So that's it. If you're tracking vocals somewhere else, sending them producer, just preamp compressor, minimal settings. That way the producer has more control over what you send them. All right, so when you're tracking your vocals, there has to be some place in your DAW where you're telling it what bit depth you want to record in. So with Cubase, there's a project setup window that you can choose sample rate, bit depth, record type, which of course must be set on some kind of uncompressed type format. Could be a WAV, could be an AIFF. Either of those are fine. Definitely needs to be a high quality file, preferably 24-bit or above. So one of the things I ask clients to do, if they're comfortable with it, is to comp their vocals. If they're not comfortable doing that, then they can send me all of their vocal takes and I will comp them together. But what I find is quite often artists really are very picky about which phrases they love, what parts that they really liked of their takes. So I prefer them to go through and find the parts that they love. It saves me a step and it saves them some money. That's what I would hope to receive from a client, is that final comped track, the pieces that they like from their various takes. And assuming that these are the final comps that we're looking at, I would want them then to bounce each one of these files individually mono. If I were preparing these tracks to be sent out raw, there wouldn't be anything on this track. There should be no inserts whatsoever. If there's any sends, make sure that you turn that off. It should just be the track, with your fader to 0 and your pan to center. And remember, if you're playing your track out to your stereo bus, when you bounce, make sure that your stereo bus is set to 0 dB. There are no inserts on it, no EQ, no limiters, nothing like that. And then you're ready to bounce. The first thing I'd want to do is make sure that I'm bouncing. This is where I set the boundaries for where I'm bouncing from the beginning of my track, starting on beat 1. And I'm going to bounce all the way to the very end of the last vocal file down here. So just looking at this from any type of DAW, if I were just bouncing out one track at a time, I could solo that track. I'd go over here to my export window. So I'd give the track a name that makes sense. It's exporting out of the stereo out. The file type is WAV, sample rate 44, bit depth 24. That's the way I want it bounced out, the same way I tracked it in. In this case in Cubase, I don't want to import the track back into Cubase, so I can turn off the pool in the audio track. You'll see some options right here. Mono versus left-right channel, split channel. I just want for a vocal a mono track, so mono down mix. You'll see down here real-time export. That does not need to be on when you're bouncing dry files out like this. And of course, with file path, you want to send your files to a folder or something that you can ultimately send off to your producer. So here you can go in. So here you can create a new folder. You can call it vocals, save it on your desktop or wherever, and now you're ready to bounce your files. So when I hit perform audio export, that will bounce from bar 9 all the way to this case to bar 79. It will bounce that whole section, just that one file. It will bounce it at the same volume. It's set 0 dB. Everything will be completely dry in 24-bit. That's how you bounce that file. And you want to do that for each one of your individual files. So once you've gone through that process for every one of your vocals, you can now go to your vocal folder that you exported all those files to and compress or zip it up. And once you've done that, it'll be a much smaller file size, much easier to send. So one last thing I want to touch on, if you're doing this process a lot, if you're a professional vocalist that is often sending vocal files off to different producers, you need to figure out within your system how to do a batch export. Any professional system can do it. Within Cubase, if I wanted to just send those vocal files, all I have to do is go in here and click Export Multiple Channels. Okay. Once I click on that, it gives me some options over here. You'll see I have output channels, group channels. For what I would want to do, I would come down here to my audio channels, and I would just click off the vocals only. Now, The process is very similar to what I did before. I choose the file path. I'll send them to a specific folder. Now the file name no longer matters because when you're doing a batch export, it takes the names of the files from the actual titles on the tracks in the session. So just like before, 24-bit mono, set the file path, and when you hit this perform audio export, it will send all of the files to that audio folder. And when you're done, you should have a folder full of vocals, zipped up, all mono, dry, unprocessed, 24-bit, ready to go. At that point, you can choose whatever method to send those you want. I like to use WeTransfer or Dropbox. Great thing about WeTransfer is you can see when the client downloads the files. They'll send you a note. All right, you guys, I hope that was useful for you. If it was, of course, please like and subscribe, hit the notification bell, and until next time.